Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed. I'm so happy to welcome Jane Friedman to the program today.
Thank you, Estelle.
I want to tell you a little bit about Jane. She has spent nearly 25 years working in the book publishing industry with a focus on author education and trend reporting. She's the editor of The Hot Sheet, the essential publishing industry newsletter for authors, and was named Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World in 2023. Her latest book is The Business of Being a Writer with University of Chicago Press, which received a starred review from Library Journal. In addition to serving on grant panels, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Creative Work Fund, she works with organizations such as the Authors Guild to bring transparency to the business of publishing. And Jane is really somebody who is known as a powerhouse in the publishing world. She was at the helm of Writer's Digest, where I teach, and I'm now a contributing editor. She was there for maybe almost a decade as the publisher, editor-in-chief. And she is just such a sought-after speaker. I recently had the pleasure of seeing her and both of us being faculty at the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop. And Jane also excerpted from my book, How to Successfully Pitch Op-Eds and Timely Cultural Pieces, in August 29 of last year. And she named it the most popular blog post on her site of the month. So I was so honored to have her included. So thank you so much, Jane, for being on the program. I have so much I want to talk to you about because there is a sea change going on in publishing, right? I started in the 1990s. And I was the magazine editor-in-chief with many publications. I've seen print go to digital. I've seen digital and the tie-in with social media and then paid subscriptions and now AI. And we're going to talk about all of it. And what do you think that writers most need to know who want to get published today?
Well, that you don't have to wait for anyone to give you permission to move ahead with whatever you want to write and publish. So when I entered the industry, which wasn't so long after you did, I think, you really needed an editor to accept you, to guide you. You needed to, I don't like the word gatekeeper necessarily, but you needed some gatekeepers to help give you the stamp of approval. There were a few outliers, but they were very rare, very unique, and had very special skills. Today, many things have changed, obviously, technologically, that have made this possible, but also I think culturally in the writing and publishing community, I think we're in an era of entrepreneurship. We're living in the era of the so-called creator economy. And whether you work in journalism or in book publishing or in media, there's a lot of opportunity around publishing on your own or in partnership with other people in your community. So you don't need the established players any longer.
Absolutely. I've seen that people come up through either Facebook or book clubs and then have gone into those gatekeeper roles
Right.
at publishing
Yep,
companies.
exactly.
I was recently at the US Book Show, and the people who were the gatekeepers have been retiring, just like the people who were the editor-in-chiefs, the heads of magazines when I was there. They've either retired, moved out of the field, done something different. So taking the role onto yourself and being entrepreneur, and what does that mean exactly? How does that translate?
I think fundamentally it means knowing who you want to reach, knowing your readership, knowing how or where to engage with them in a sustainable way. It doesn't necessarily have to be online or on social media, although it often is the case that it's online because, frankly, it's easier than jetting all over the world trying to find your readers. So I think when you see successful authors in any medium, it's because they really understand what their readers care about, what people are talking about, what they're doing has relevance to that audience or to that community. And people seek out their voice or their opinion. They want to know what this person is going to do next. And to kind of give an example, since we're talking in the abstract, for book publishing, you mentioned how a lot of the people who have been veterans of the industry have been retiring. And if you look at who just departed Penguin Random House, there was a huge swath of old timers who left, one of them being the CEO, Madeline McIntosh. Well, she has launched a new publishing company, very interestingly, called Authors Equity. Look at who's in the name of that company. Authors. And the mission of that company is to partner with authors, recognizing that authors now have the power to build audiences in a way that publishers, they're struggling with.
You know, it's really interesting because I feel like, and I know I don't really love the word gatekeepers either,
Yeah.
but people look at agents as gatekeepers. And, you know, a big part of my mission is to make us see that it's not like they're the ones up on Mount Olympus and you're the
Right.
little one. It's really an equitable, mutually beneficial situation when it works. So in terms of like meeting people, I've noticed a lot of people are finding agents through going to conferences, like Writer's Digest has the where you can pitch an agent. HJA, where I've been a member since 1997, has the same thing at their annual conferences and virtual now as well. And there are industries built around having traveling, you know, either traveling conferences where you can meet agents or virtual, where you
Yeah.
can just meet them through the privacy of your own modem.
Mhm.
And so that I think has made a tremendous difference in, you know, just not sending out 150 random through the slush pile. I always say, even if you go to one of these events and the agent is speaking, you can just say when you send an email, I heard you speak at the event. You don't have to have been one of those people to force your way to the front of the room to get in the face of the agent for 2 seconds. So it's really another way of finding that way to get noticed.
Yes. Yes. I would still add, though, even I do think it's really valuable to meet agents in person. It helps you see them as more human, perhaps fallible, which they are. Some of them actually aren't very good business people, which I try to tell authors because they somehow expect agents have, I don't know, special gifts or unique abilities in the business that maybe they don't have. And that's not always the case. So, in any event, so yes, to all of those things, but I still want to add, try not to be the supplicant. they they will actually respect you more, communicate with you more honestly if they don't see you as someone who is desperately needing something from them and will be crushed emotionally and psychologically if you don't get an acceptance.
And I think
So,
it's in life, right? I mean, anything, going for a
right,
job, having a date.
right. Yes, it applies to everything in life. Please don't be the supplicant.
I love it. In terms of agents, also, I tell people to get even a monthly subscription to Publishers Marketplace because they can vet the agent. Maybe they think it's a great agent, but the agent doesn't even handle their genre. Have you seen that? A lot of that where people are just like, it's a name, it's an agent, let me grab it.
Yeah, that's an age-old problem ever since I entered the business, just kind of blasting out your materials to any name you can find. And people, sometimes people justify it by saying, well, it's a numbers game. And like to some extent, I can understand that, but it's not thoughtful. And it also doesn't really pay attention to how this is a business partnership that's meant to last. If it's going well, it's meant to last decades. And so you wouldn't just send out emails to any potential marriage partners. I hope you want to like send out to any woman you could find or any man you could find. This is who I want. Would you be my partner? Like, you have to trust that person, and you also have to, there has to be some chemistry there where your values are aligned, or you believe like this person is going to support your interests, and they're a fiduciary. So, they're responsible for handling your money. So I don't think any agent is necessarily going to work. You have to pick the right agent.
I agree. And some of them are the ones that you're going to call at 3 in the morning. I've had some agents on my program, and some of them are going to be the ones who want to just keep it, very, very professional. And so you have to understand. And also at some point in your life that your needs may change, right? And the type of book that you're doing, your needs may change. So that's all important. Now, do people really have to have an agent in this day and age?
Well, if you want to be published as a debut by one of the big five, one of the New York houses that we know the names of, like HarperCollins, Simon and Schuster, et cetera, then I would highly encourage folks to get an agent for that, because you risk getting trampled by the publisher, even if the publisher has good intentions. These are huge, corporations, global corporations. And the contracts, I think we can say, are not particularly friendly. And they already have the things that they've negotiated over the years on behalf of all their clients that will now be put into your contracts that you wouldn't even know to negotiate for. They should also be getting you a higher advance. And they can also advise you on the right home for the book out of the dozens or hundreds of imprints that are out there. No writer can realistically have that kind of knowledge, and that's part of the agent's job. And obviously, once the contract is signed, if things kind of go off the rails, or if you, God forbid, your editor departs, it's your agent who's going to be that grounding or stabilizing force, or the person who steps in to be bad cop. Now, that said, if you're looking at university presses, independent presses, small presses, you can absolutely approach those places without an agent if their guidelines permit it, but you would still want someone to help you out with the contract, unless you just happen to be really familiar with publishing contracts, and most people aren't. Now, the final like PS I want to put on this is that there are some authors who are very experienced, like they've been through this a number of times. They know what the contracts look like. They might be perfectly comfortable either negotiating it themselves or having a literary lawyer or whoever handles some of their other legal affairs step in and do that contract for a flat fee. Totally okay. But if I'm just talking about the average debut, you probably want an agent.
That's really helpful. And I completely agree. In terms of the other aspect of publishing, which is really big in the news now, hybrid publishing. There are some very well-respected and well-established companies out there. I think She Writes is one of them. There are also ones that are more like vanity presses that will prey on authors. And I think it was Victoria Strauss had a website that people used to be able to go to. I don't know if that still exists or if there's a place to vet aside from doing Googling or ChatGPT.
Right. Yeah, Victoria Strauss Writer Beware website and blog is still very active, still a good place to check company names, agent names, publisher names, any type of partner you're considering. It's not a bad idea to run them through the Writer Beware search and see what Victoria has said about them, if anything. But to go back to the hybrid question, I think the challenge here is that the word hybrid gets used by anyone who wants to use it because, just because it sounds more innovative, or it's become what I would consider at this point a marketing term, rather than a description of what the company does. Now, some hybrid companies will fight you on what I've just said because they feel that they're obviously unhappy. The ones who are high quality, they hold themselves to some particular standard. They don't like the fact that this term is getting diluted by a lot of bad actors, but the fact remains, this is the case. And I would say there are more bad actors than good. So this really muddies the water for anyone who wants to use a so-called hybrid. Now, the IBPA, the Independent Book Publishers Association, does have a list of criteria you can use to try and vet a hybrid, but these criteria, I mean, good luck trying to vet a publisher as a writer based on these criteria. It'll say something like applies professional standards to the publishing process or has meaningful sales and marketing. Well, how would you know if you haven't experienced the publishing process before? And there are certainly traditional publishers who might not live up to some of the criteria that they list, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very, mushy. So I don't know that the criteria are very helpful. So where does that leave people? Well, the advice I give is once you decide you are going to pay to publish your book, and that's what a hybrid publisher is, you're going to pay them to publish your book. Stop thinking about the term hybrid and think about what is it that I want this company to provide me with? What service, what support, what quality am I looking for? And is this the best company to partner with to provide it? And then do the math, find out what you're going to pay. Sometimes the upfront cost is just a fraction of what you will ultimately end up paying because you could get nickeled and dimed. There could be hidden costs, all sorts of things that come up you do not expect. And then you need to compare what you pay with what you're going to earn per copy sold. Hybrid should tell you that up front, or any service should tell you that up front. And then see how many copies you need to sell to earn out. And are you comfortable with how that looks? Now, understand that most published books today, even if they're from a traditional publisher, the average number sold is in the low four figures, like maybe 1,000 to 2,000 for a very mediocre book that didn't get a lot of support. So a lot of authors overestimate how much they're going to sell, and they end up in the hole. Now, for some people, this is not a problem. They're not publishing this to earn money. They're not expecting to earn a profit. They have the excess funds, to support the project. But know that going in, do not be surprised later on, because, the hybrid, they don't stay in business unless you're paying the bills. So whether your book sells or not, I'm not going to say it's of no consequence to them, because it certainly looks good when they have successful books, but they're going to continue on publishing books whether they sell well or not.
And do they get distribution, or does that become an issue as well?
That becomes an issue as well. So some of the hybrids have what I would call reasonable distribution on par with traditional publishers. Doesn't mean your book is going to be stocked on shelves. It might or it might not. And then others really don't have anything better than what I would consider author distribution through Ingram Spark or Amazon KDP. So print on demand distribution. So, okay, so here's the big caveat here. You're like, oh, great. Well, I'll choose a hybrid that has the distribution that's on par with the traditional publisher. And for those who are really looking at the details, this usually means Ingram's, Two Rivers, not Ingram Spark, but Ingram's Two Rivers or some other Ingram distribution program that's not POD driven. It might be Simon and Schuster or a bigger publisher, Publishers Group West, Independent Publishers Group. Those are some of the major distributors in the country. Okay, so let's say the hybrid uses one of those companies. It means if you're going to get the benefit of that distribution, you're probably going to have to invest in a print run. There's almost no question. That means usually minimum 500 copies, might be 1,000. You might be encouraged to print more. Once you print those copies that you're paying for, how many of them are going to sell? How many of them are going to get placed on shelves? Then you're going to be encouraged, well, you need a marketing and promotion plan to support those copies actually selling off the shelf into consumers' hands. Now you're looking at another, $15,000 on top of the print run costs, which could be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. So you see how the math starts to kind of get out of control. So when people think, oh, I'll just get the distribution and my problems are solved, understand that it requires a lot of investment from you, the author, for that to have a meaningful result.
That makes so much sense. When I speak at bookstores or things like that, my publisher, New World Library, who I've loved working with, says that they have an internal person who handles those sales directly with the bookstore. So I don't get even involved, but other people go to an event and they have a carton of books in their trunk and they're bringing it. And that's not what I'm supposed to do. That's not what I do. So,
Right. So the people who are bringing their cartons of books, there could be lots of reasons for that. It could be they like selling direct. Lots of authors buy their own copies, regardless of how they publish, and then sell direct so they can pocket more of the profit. So in other words, you're not getting the publisher's royalty, which might only be a couple dollars. You're getting maybe double that or triple that, depending on how you bought your copies. Other times, you're working with a hybrid or a publishing service that doesn't have the distribution, or maybe they're distributing books through Ingram Spark and the books aren't returnable, and so the conference bookstore or the venue or whatever it is, they're not willing to order the books because the terms aren't sufficient for them to place that order. And so here come the authors with their own carton of books because the site would not order them for whatever reason. So yeah, I mean, if you're working with a hybrid and you want them to be handling things like this and you don't want to go with your carton of books, then you're looking at the most expensive path in working with a hybrid. So an agent once told me, if you're working with a hybrid, $25,000 is kind of the ticket for entry if you're really taking advantage of what they have to offer, and often it's more than that.
And what about university presses? They really are having a resurgence because I see so many, and your book is a university press, a very well-respected university press when it comes to publishing books. So what do you recommend? Some of them are very small, some of them are very big. I guess each of them, it's sort of like, it's not a licensing thing, so everything is very separate. Each individual university has their own personality, I suppose.
Yes, very much so. So it's hard to say they do exactly one thing because they all have varied missions. Some university presses are getting more into what I would consider consumer or trade publishing, as opposed to academic or scholarly publishing, because it's actually more profitable. So, a lot of university presses for a long time, and still, they publish things that don't necessarily have commercial value. They're not going to be in bookstores. It's mainly library sales. It's for course adoption. And so, those things have to be almost funded by the university community in order to exist. And so some of those presses may then dip into the general mainstream consumer publishing as a way to prop up the stuff that's really not going to sell sufficiently. Then there are other presses that from the very start, they've always done things that are of general interest. You'll find that many university presses will do histories of their region. They'll have series that focus on very particular topics that are often of interest to that state or their region. I'm with University of Chicago Press, which has a very specific series on writing and publishing, and they do the Chicago Manual of Style. And so they have this very long, strong tradition of publishing books for writers and publishers. That's why I'm there. They're the perfect place for me to be, and that was a very conscious decision. The other thing that university presses do is some of them do very literary work. And by that, I mean they're publishing poetry collections, short story collections, essay collections, anthologies, things that, commercial publishers have really, I would say, stepped away from, unless you're the poet laureate of the country or you're an influencer of some kind. So they play a very important role for people writing those literary works.
What about audio? Because I was at the US Book Show, and that was with Publishers Weekly, and they said that audiobooks are exploding. They are the biggest growth opportunity. And what happened with my book, it's a writing book, but it has some stories from my life. Nobody was interested in the audio rights. And so my publisher said, we are happy to revert the rights back to you, which was very kind of them to offer. And so I discussed it with my agent, and I said, yeah, I'll take it back, because I knew that AI, and we're going to talk about AI, was becoming big, and maybe there are things that I'm going to be able to do with it. So the book is almost a year old. And recently, I think the publicity person went to one of the big book shows, maybe it was in England, or the UK one, and they came back and somebody was interested in the audio rights. So I gave the rights back, because I said, sure, why don't we do that? And then I said, and I'd like to audition to read my book. So they said, sure, so you could do an audition. So I did an audition, and I have to tell you, Jane, I mean, I studied acting, I've studied voice. I did maybe 25 takes to get 4 minutes from a chapter. And I was like, oh my God, do I really want this? Well, they ended up saying, we like your voice, but we'd like to go with a professional for the book, but we'd like you to read the intro. So
That's great.
I thought that was wonderful. So I recently taped the intro, and then I said, I just have some constraints for the person who's going to do the voice. They have to be believable as somebody who could be a mother, because I have a teenage daughter, somebody who is not esoteric, because that's the farthest thing, or academic. That's even though I teach at NYU, that's the farthest thing from how I approach. I approach things in a very realistic pop culture way. Not, pop culture meaning that what's in the zeitgeist. So they played it for me. They sent it to me, and I loved it. I fell in love with the part. I was like, this is perfect. So that's like a perfect kind of way that this went full circle. But I guess I want to ask two things. I want to ask your thoughts about audio books. If a person should do it, should it only be like if you're doing a memoir? Because probably if I'm doing a memoir, maybe I would want to do my whole memoir, even though I know that it would take hours and hours. Or, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you have a traditional publisher and you get consulted on the narrator, as you should, and you want to put your hat in the ring, I think that's totally acceptable. They will reject you or just have you do the introduction if they feel like it's not going to work out. And they have good reason for that, because the number one reason people abandon an audiobook or choose not to buy it in the first place is because they don't like the narrator. So it's a critical selection, and it's something where I'm not sure that even the majority of authors understand what you discovered, which is how challenging it is to do for an entire book. It's very demanding. So I would leave it to the professionals for the most part, but absolutely tell the publisher, what you think is going to be appropriate for the book. And I would say in most cases, your editor and publisher are going to be on the same page as you. They want something that fits. They don't want it to seem incongruous, with the voice of the book. Now, memoir presents an interesting issue. But there are even famous people who didn't narrate, their own audiobook, like Britney Spears didn't want to do her own audiobook. I don't know what her reasons were, and maybe she spoke about what her reasons were. but they found someone who did a magnificent job. But in other words, my audiobook is also not narrated by me, it's narrated by someone else. So just because it's so important to get right, I would say leave it to the experts to help you make that decision. Now, if you're paying for it yourself and you're trying to get it done cheaply by narrating it yourself, I would definitely get some coaching. Make sure that you're not really undercutting the success of your audiobook because of something that is, I don't know, not to the level it should be in how you produce it. There are some specific places you can go to self-distribute the audiobook. I think the best is probably Findaway Voices, which is owned by Spotify. And they distribute broadly, not just to Spotify, but also to Audible and all of the big players. And it's, even though you can get paid more if you're exclusive to Audible, as a business practice, I don't think that's very wise, especially since the audio market is growing. As you pointed out, it's an area that's pretty lucrative right now. So the other thing that's happening is the use of AI or synthetic voices for audiobook narration. Publishers are not rushing to save money by using AI, like on their new releases or on their featured titles. It's really about, at the moment, trying to get backlist titles that are selling in too small of quantities to justify a full production with an original narrator, trying to get those more accessible and out in the market in audio, kind of similar to how there was this rush to get all of the old print backlist into ebook format. So there's now, looking back at those older titles, how can we efficiently get them into audio? AI narration is probably going to fill in a lot of gaps, especially for nonfiction, or academic books, things where you don't necessarily need have that human quality in order to have a successful audiobook.
Now, when you say that, do you mean like little clips of sections of the book using AI, or do you mean an actual AI narration that's going to be used?
Yeah, wholesale AI narration. It's called synthetic narration, synthetic voices. And so there's already actually a lot of competition going on for who has, some of the best services in this regard. Deep Zen is one of the companies. I think SpeechKey is the other, and they're already partnered with like, I think Apple and Google and Ingram. Findaway Voices, I think, may also have a partnership. Anyway, if you wanted to use a synthetic voice, it's totally possible to do that. And Amazon KDP or Audible, in effect, it's kind of, if you're already publishing through Amazon KDP, you may have received an offer from Amazon/Audible to use their synthetic voice narration to get your books into Audible, because they realize that one of the big barriers here is the cost of production. It's $5,000, for an average book, and it takes a long time to recoup that through sales.
Before my publisher approached me through my agent saying that they wanted to revert the rights back again because they had somebody interested, somebody randomly emailed me on LinkedIn and said, "Oh, we love your book and we'd love to audio narrate it. And like all you would have to do is pay us $500 and then we'd get it out for you." And I sent it to I said, "Is this legit?" And they're like, "No, don't do anything with this." I said, "No, I haven't." But what is that? What is it? Just bad actors? What is it?
I don't know. I would have to know the name of the company. It could have been an AI company. I don't know. Although $500 is actually a lot, because AI narration is even cheaper than that for most books. It could have just been someone who's hoping through high volume to make a few bucks. I don't know. But certainly there's a lot of, usually when someone solicits you, it's not a good idea to take them up on the offer. But it's hard to say in this case.
So I have to pivot to even more about AI, because you became somebody who was right there smack in the news because you were so involved when AI started using your name in books that you did not write. And you were all over the news. I remember this was a couple of months ago, or maybe last year, and you're still the go-to person that news programs go to because you are really invested in kind of navigating and making sure that this part of the industry is as safe as can be. Can you speak a little bit to your experience and where you are now with everything.
So what happened was about 6 books were published that were credited to me. They appeared on Amazon and on my Goodreads profile. They may have gone even further, but I wasn't looking. I was panicking a little. And when I looked at the first chapters using the Look Inside feature on Amazon, it was really clear to me it was AI generated material. Like, now you can't prove it, right? But if you've played around with any of the tools out there like ChatGPT, you kind of know. Especially, this was a year ago almost. So even at that time, the tools weren't even as good as they are now. And it was just really, the writing made sense, but it lacked substance. So I didn't know they existed until a reader reached out to me and said, I found these while searching for your work on Amazon, but I'm not certain that these are actually by you. And she was right. So it begs the question of, okay, who did this and how? And there are, I think people are generally aware that there are a lot of books that get published on Amazon that are counterfeit, fake, fraudulent, spammy, low content, low quality, summarizations. That sort of content has been on Amazon for many years now. And so AI has just accelerated that production of content. It's now, instead of it taking maybe a couple of weeks to produce it, it takes a couple hours. So ultimately, because of this huge influx of new AI generated material hitting Amazon, low quality, maybe or maybe not legal, but low quality, Amazon capped accounts at 3 new published books per day. So that gives you a sense of how much must have been hitting the marketplace for them to actually put a cap on the number of titles. But of course, it's still happening actively. And you can go out and take courses, online courses that will teach you how to produce AI generated books and profit off them. They'll teach you how to find the right search words or keywords that are popular and then generate a book based on those search terms or keywords. If I had to guess, the person who did this was told by one of these systems, oh, Jane Friedman is a really popular search term for writing and publishing books. Why don't you generate some books like that? Since then, the people who do this have gotten more sophisticated. So they might not use the author's exact name. Like, they might not use the name Jane Friedman. They might use something like Ellen Jane Friedman or Ellen J. Friedman, just to just different enough to not be you, but close enough to confuse people where you may just be on the periphery of their understanding. And they're like, oh, I've heard that name. So that happened to Ted Gioia, who's a really well-established jazz critic and jazz author. Someone put out a book on jazz that looks like something he would write, but they changed his name just slightly. But he found out, and every time this happens, there's a huge PR or publicity burst. Amazon is asked for comment, the books come down, and then we move on to the next iteration of that story. It's difficult because it's not necessarily illegal from a copyright perspective. It's illegal for different reasons. So in my case, it was a right of publicity problem. Like, people were using my name without my permission, deliberately confusing people in the market. And it's really hard to, sue someone on a right of publicity basis because those are governed by state laws. There aren't any federal laws. And that's why Congress is now looking at different laws that would help protect people from deep fakes or from people using AI who could abuse it by replicating someone's name, likeness, voice, etc.
Oh, I'm glad that Congress is looking into ways, because it's just going to keep getting more and more insidious. And
Yes.
it's early days. It's sort of like they're in nursery school with AI right now, and in 2 years they're going to be graduating college. So
Right.
there's going to be so much more of an evolution. So it's good that there's maybe going to be some ways to police that as new things arise, which I'm sure they will. I want to talk a little bit about tips for writing memoir. And you had a recent piece. You have so many wonderful pieces, first of all, on your site. You had one writing advice from Jane Austen. You have crafting memoir with a message, blending story with self-help. And this got a lot of attention because a lot of memoir teachers out there, and I'm somebody working on a memoir now, and a lot of memoir teachers are saying you have to do more than just write your story. It has to have a self-help angle. It has to have something additional. And you, and I have your comments saying, I don't particularly advise that. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think what's underlying all of this discussion and sometimes conflict of opinion is that memoirs have become challenging to sell, at least to traditional publishers. And it's not that anyone's doing anything wrong, like it's not necessarily the writers who are to blame. It's just, it is so competitive. It's like there's so many more people today writing memoir and trying to get it traditionally published. And when I first saw memoir kind of, I don't want to say blow up on the scene, but because it's not like there weren't any memoirs prior to this, but Angela's Ashes to me was like kind of a turning point where people thought, oh, I could write my memoir. Like average people writing about their life story can be very compelling. And so ever since then, I feel like this idea is in people's heads that their story is deserving of this big five traditional publishing deal. Some of them are, but a great many of them are not, let's be honest. So enter the hybrid memoir, for lack of a better term, the memoir that is not entirely memoir, but memoir with something else mixed in. So what's that something else going to be? I mean, if it were me advising a writer, I would really suggest like a researched memoir. So this is where whatever question or challenge it is your memoir deals with, is there something that can be researched? Are there other writers you can read and be in conversation with? Can you go out and interview people? Can you collect data? Can you do a survey? Can you, whatever the research might mean for your issue? And then the book isn't just your story, but it's about your discovery of new information or this research that helps answer the question. So people are getting, you know, both the story and this discovery.
Do you have a recommendation of a current memoir that employs that tactic?
There's actually a really good post at my site by someone who did this because she was asked to do the reverse. She had written a book that was really about discovery and research into music. I think it's Wired for Music. The article is titled, I think, How to Write a Hybrid Memoir. And so she had written a straight informational book, rich with information, but the publisher wanted her to put in more of her own story because it was so fascinating. She found her own story not fascinating. So she struggled to marry the two things together. It is not easy. It's a challenge. And so the article she writes for my site is about how she handled this challenge and went through many major revisions and then was finally successful with that book. So that's a really good example to look at. Now, the other thing that I think people choose, because frankly, it's easier, is the self-help combo where you're offering advice or lessons, or, you know, there's something in there that has a self-help aspect to it. And this is, I admit, this is a personal reaction, but, and I have written personal essay. I mainly read nonfiction. And so this is, I think, partly why I have strong feelings about it. I feel like when you're telling your own story, for me, it's I rebel against telling people what to think about it or advising them what to do. I feel like you need to decide for yourself what this means given your own experience. I am not in a place to advise or guide you. I'm not your therapist. I'm not your coach. I'm going to tell you what happened, and then you act in a way that you see fit. So sometimes I question whether people are really in a position to be offering self-help advice if that's not actually why they came to memoir in the first place. And they've been told to do it because now it'll sell. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but just make sure you're comfortable being put in that role.
Interesting. A lot to chew on there.
Yeah.
I have to pivot to another favorite aspect of what you talk about, and that is platform.
Yes.
And it's kind of a fraught word because some people think it means, and I've seen you speak on this, including at Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop. And a lot of times people think, oh, it means that they have to be on every social media and post 5 times a day, all their content, all their musings, all their thoughts on what they've eaten, who they've seen, their family history, what they're wearing, just every single aspect. And I have to say, by the time people start doing it, I just glaze over. It's just like, oh God, not again. But there are people that share important information or maybe curate content, which is part of what you do on your website when you share important articles. And I will link to the ones that you mentioned and that I mentioned, including my piece. But what I think for platform that really helps sell books is going on podcasts. So not only my podcast, but I've been on The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, and that was tremendous with Bianca Moraes. I've been on Zibby Owens' Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I've been on Let's Talk Memoir, and Lisa Cooper Ellison has a brilliant podcast, Writing Your Resilience. And she's also a very frequent contributor to your site. And I feel like podcasts are, podcasts are radio, right? Some with the visual element. But I do feel that that branches out the audience, and maybe it's better than posting a million times a day on social media. What are your thoughts on that? And obviously not everybody's going to get on the top podcasts, but there's still podcasts that bring a new audience, even if it's like 200 new people. Let's say those 200 people buy your book. There you go.
I think every author is going to thread the needle differently on this. And that's what makes it so hard to tell people what to do to build platform. It's really, it has to be based on what you can sustain, what actually interests you, what you want to talk about, what you want to share. And then, where your readers like to hang out is also going to affect your success. I don't think it should drive what you decide to do. I don't think everything's driven by what your readers want, but certainly you'll gain more traction if you're going where there's a higher proportion of them having conversations. So, for example, I had an author, I love to talk about this particular author, Merle Bombaderi. She did a book called The Baby Decision about the decision whether or not to have children. Now, the first edition of that book came out in the 80s. She reissued it on her own about 10 years ago. And, a lot of time had passed since that first edition had come out, and book marketing and promotion had changed entirely. She had no idea, really what it would mean. And she wasn't on social media. She was past 70 at this point, but she was open-minded and driven by the mission to help women struggling with this decision. And so she did the simplest thing in the world. She went to Google and she started searching for how do I know if I should have a baby, or, just looking, searching for the same things her readers would search for. And immediately she found a subreddit called Fence Sitter, which is all about the decision whether or not to have children. And she was like, these are my people. These are my readers. They're already gathered here, 20,000 of them.
What was the site called?
So it's on Reddit. It's a discussion board called Fence Sitter on Reddit.
And you know that Google recently took all the content from Reddit and bought it, made it their own, which we're going to see what's going to happen with that, right?
Yes. So that's another ball of wax. So, but at the time that she did this, that was not prevalent yet. So she started participating on Fence Sitter, not telling people to buy her book, but just answering people's questions. Well, it did not take long before everyone saw this lady knows what she's talking about. She has a book. And she soon did an Ask Me Anything, which is the classic Reddit, thing that authors want to do to get their books sold. And it did sell a lot of books for her. And also now the community regularly, like if there's a newcomer asking a lot of basic questions, people will say, have you read Merle's book? You might want to start there. So now she has a group of people who market and promote her book for her. So I'm not saying that, oh, you should just go to Reddit and do all your book marketing. All I'm saying is Merle was a curious person and she was wondering, where are people discussing this? How am I going to find like-minded influencers, authors, media outlets? And she stumbled on Reddit, which she had never used in her life, saw how she could engage, and was very successful at it. To me, that's the heart of platform. That's it. It's all encapsulated in that story. And it doesn't have to be tear your hair out difficult. It doesn't have to be about sharing things you want to remain private. But you do have to have an interest in other people. Like you have to be interested in engaging in some way, whether it's online or offline.
That is really clever. And it really is being an entrepreneur, which is what you first spoke about. It's sort of this approach that you're not waiting for things to drop in your lap. You're going out, you're creating and making your own destiny. And I think if writers can embrace that, that really will make a difference in how they approach and how they are responded to.
Yes, be proactive. Don't wait for someone to discover you. You might be waiting a long time.
Those are brilliant final words, Jane. And I also want to point out that your book is going to have a second iteration, right? So,
Yes.
and when is that expected to come out?
That's releasing in spring 2025. And if you visit my website, there's a sign up if you want to be alerted to, pre-orders, exclusives, bonuses, and all the rest.
Beautiful. Well, you'll have to come back and talk about all the changes in the book, because I'm sure you're going to be addressing AI and some of the other things that have just recently popped up in the publishing horizon. Thank you so much, Jane. It was such a pleasure having you speak with me today.
Thank you, Estelle.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.